This is Patrick McGuire, the Curator of Education at the Elkhart County Historical Museum. And today our topic is Megafauna. So we're going to explore in our exhibit, Crossroads of Elkhart County Forging a Path, some of the artifacts that we have on display that relate to Megafauna. After that, we're going to look at specific bones that belong to Megafauna and talk about what we can learn just from small pieces of these animals. And then finally, we're going to make a craft so you can have your own mammoth at home. So let's go take a look. So now we're here in our exhibit, and specifically, I'm going to talk about 3 different species of megafauna that lived in Elkhart County. So we found remnants in the ground when people have dug these up, whether by archaeology or on farms. We've found documented evidence of these 3 specific species. So the first species we're going to talk about is ground sloths, and I'm holding a reproduction claw. So if this was a real claw, we would have it under glass. So this is a fake one, but it's a model of what a claw of a ground sloth would have looked like. So if this is how big their claw is, imagine how big they were. So ground sloths stood anywhere from 8 to 10 feet tall. They weighed anywhere from 11 to 12 tons. So imagine how heavy that is. That's anywhere from 22,000 to 24,000 pounds. Now there's a number of different species of ground sloths, but the ground sloths that were documented here in northern Indiana, their scientific name is Megafauna jeffersoni. And actually, this claw gave it its scientific name because Megafauna translates to large claw. And the Jeffersoni part is a little bit interesting because it was named after President Thomas Jefferson, who early on in the United States history explored and excavated a ground sloth, so they named the species after him. A little bit more about the ground sloth, their behavior. They walked on all 4s, but they were able to stand up on their hind legs to feed, which we'll learn about when we examine this claw a little bit closer. So the ground sloth was one of the animals that lived here in Elkhart County. The second megafauna I want to talk about is a mastodon. So mastodon stood anywhere from 7 to 9 feet tall and weighed anywhere from 7 to 12 tons. And mastodons are found not just here in North America, but even in Europe as well. They resemble most closely, if you were to compare it to an animal today, think of a mastodon closely kind of like an Asian elephant. There are a lot of differences, mostly their fur. Mastodons were covered in fur so they could keep warm. But their behavior was similar to what we think of elephants are, especially how they travel. They were a herd animal. They traveled in herds, which was mostly made up of female mastodons and young. Male mastodons usually lived solitary by themselves and would only join herds when it was time to mate. And our biggest megafauna, the biggest example of megafauna that lived here in Elkhart County is the mammoth. So as you can see here in our exhibit, we have a piece of a mammoth tusk that was recovered in Middlebury in the late 1980s. So out of all the 3 mentions of megafauna, ground sloths, mastodons, and mammoths are the biggest. So they stand anywhere from 10 to 12 feet tall. They weigh anywhere from 12 to 14 tons. They have really small ears, which the reason they have that is so they could keep warm. Those big flappy ears were not good for keeping them warm, so they had really small ears. So imagine when you look at an elephant, they have those big ear flaps. Mammoths have really small ones because of that cold weather. And all these animals went extinct anywhere from 10,500 years ago for a variety of different reasons. Some it was disease, some it was overhunting by paleo people as they entered this area, and some of it was just through the contraction of climate change. And as the climate got warmer, these animals that were built for cold weather couldn't survive. So all these animals did live here in this area about 10,000 years ago, but even today, we are still finding evidence, more and more evidence of what these animals were, how many there were, and what we can learn from them. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to head into our lab and we're going to learn a little bit more about these animals and what we can pick from specific bones and what we can learn not just about the animals but the environment that they lived in. So now we've moved into our lab. We're going to take an examination of some of these bones of these megafauna. So we've moved out of the exhibit and we have 3 examples of megafauna bones. Now, just to be honest, all these are reproductions, they're not real. If they were real, they'd be much more heavier, and we'd have them behind glass, and I definitely would not be touching them with my bare hands. But we brought you in here so we can explore these 3 bones and show what these little pieces of these animals can tell us about not just what these animals were and how they lived, but what they lived in. So first, let's examine a ground sloth claw. So you saw this earlier in the exhibit. And what this really tells us is it helps us to inform us about what ground sloths ate. So these were gigantic animals. Think about how tall they were, how heavy they were. And the funny thing is, ground sloths, mastodons, and mammoths were all herbivores. They all ate plants. None of them ate meat. And imagine how much they'd have to eat in a day, how many sticks and bushes and trees and grass they would have to eat just to survive. That's a lot of food. But these things can tell us about what they ate and how they ate. So if we look at the ground sloth claw, this helps us to inform us about what they ate because of how it's evolved to use them to scrape off of trees. So ground sloth claws walked on all 4s, but they could also lean back on their hind legs, and they'd use claws like this to scrape leaves and bushes and trees and get all those things off that they were going to eat and then put it right in their mouth. So now, ground sloths had a number of different claws on their feet. We just only have one here to show you. But look how big this is, and compare it to how big, your fingernails are, or your toenails. So these animals were much bigger, but it really helps us to learn about what they ate and how they ate. So this is the ground sloth claw, and it tells us how they scraped food to get them to eat. Next, let's take a look at the mastodon tooth. So mastodons, their teeth really tell us about what they ate and their environment. So first off, we know that mastodons, by looking at their teeth, were browsers. Much like ground sloths, they used their teeth to pull leaves off of trees. And we know that by the way their teeth is formed. And I want to point out a specific feature here. And you can see the sharp edges on the top and the bottom of their teeth here. So those actually help them to do that scraping and pull those things off, pull the leaves off the trees. So these sharp cones here really help them to feed themselves. But the second thing it tells us is because knowing what they ate helps to inform us about their environment. So we know that this animal mostly ate things off of trees. So that lets us know that the environment they lived in was mostly forested areas. So we know at some point, thousands of years ago, this area that is Elkhart County, northern Indiana, had lots of dense forests because these animals would not be here if there weren't forests in their food source. And finally, let's take a look at a mammoth tooth. So while the sloth and the mastodon were browsers, mammoths were a little bit different. They were grazers. So if we were to compare them to an animal we all have today, think about cows. Cows are grazers because they mostly eat grasses. And the teeth help us to figure that out, mostly because, and this is the top of their tooth, it's flat. So imagine a bottom set and a top set that look exactly the same. And as they would get grasses and they would chew them, they would take the tops of these teeth to grind together as they would chew them. So it helps us to know that these animals mostly ate grasses. Now the other thing we know, and what scientists and archaeologists have told us and what they've learned over their history of studying these animals, is that mammoths only had 6 sets of teeth. So they would grow one as a young mammoth, and then they would fall out, and another set would grow right behind them. And scientists have told us that mammoths only had 6 sets of teeth. So once that 6th set fell out of their mouth, mammoths mostly would starve to death. And we actually think the mammoth tusk that we have on exhibit, because scientists have told us that the mammoth lived to be about 50 years old, that it probably may have starved to death after it lost its teeth. So it really helps us to inform about the life of Megafauna, what we can learn from them, what they ate, and that really helps us learn about the environment as well. So now that we've learned and examined specific places, let's do a fun activity so you can have your own mammoth at home. All right, so now we're out of the lab, and now it's time to make your own mammoth. So when we're all done, this is what it's gonna look like. So I've made my own here, and I'm gonna show you how you can make one in your own house to have on display, whether it's on the fridge or you play with it, or maybe your brothers and sisters make your own herd of mammoths. So let's talk about the materials you need. First, you need this. So I found this on the internet. In the description of this video, we'll post a link where you can just print this off. It's a PDF. You can print it off at your house, and then you have your materials ready to make a mammoth. So this is what you need for the body parts. And the other things you're going to need: crayons or markers, doesn't matter. I mean, I colored mine brown because that's the color mammoths were, but you can color it whatever color you want. You're going to need glue or glue sticks. For you younger kids, make sure you might have your mom and dad or your aunts or uncles or brothers and sisters or really anyone older than you help. And finally, scissors, and make sure that you're safe. So it's a pretty simple process. The first thing I did is I colored my entire sheet. I colored every piece except for the tusks. And then I took my scissors and I cut it up. I took some glue and I glued it together, and the finished product here is your mammoth when you glue it all together. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put this on our YouTube page, and we want you to make your own mammoth and then share with us a picture of your completed mammoth on your social media. So you can look at our Facebook page, just search Elkhart County Historical Museum, or you can email us photos and we'll put them up. So take a look, make your own mammoth, and then you'll have your own megafauna at home. So that covers our video today where we learn about megafauna. We hope you've learned something and learned about these great ancient animals that are no longer around anymore. But I hope you stick with us, and you'll see a next video in our series. So thank you all. We'll see you next time.